So being able to shape that is kind of what we do, which then brings us to sort of our own agency and our own brand. And you mentioned that we like to sort of do things differently, or at least explore what different might look like, which leads us to Bowie Badger, right? He's the personality of INVNT and of INVNT Group.
Welcome to No More Bad Events, a fun and insightful podcast for professional event organizers and for anyone at any level interested in producing nothing but the best events. Each week, we'll talk with legendary event professionals to get an inside look into what they think makes a great event. And in the process, we'll draw out insider secrets, non-traditional approaches, and compelling stories from the most captivating personalities in the business. No More Bad Events is produced and presented by eSpeakers, the most trusted online platform for the best keynote speakers in the world. And I'm your host, Scott Bloom, comedian, event MC, and now your podcast host. Let's get started. Hey folks, thanks so much for dropping by. I was just in the car with my son just before I was recording this, and he said, "What got you into podcasting?" And I told him, well, basically some people approached me. They said, "Hey, you want to host a show about events?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "Do you have any experience doing podcasting?" And I go, well, not podcasting. I was a DJ in college, something he never knew. When I say I was a DJ in college, I was a DJ for a few months my freshman year. I always wanted to do comedy. I thought, hey, I'll be a DJ at the local college campus radio station, WRUC in Schenectady. I went to Union College, and I got the coveted 2 to 4 a.m. shift. That's what they did with freshmen. But what I remember from that experience was I played a lot of David Bowie. I ran Bowie all the time on rotation. Was playing Changes constantly, Young Americans, one of my favorite songs, Heroes. Played a lot of David Bowie. So I thought it was like an incredible coincidence that I connected with my two guests today. And I knew immediately after speaking with them and doing a little research on their website that we would get along great. My guests today are Kristina McCoobery and Paul Blurton, two exceptionally creative individuals at this New York City-based award-winning agency, INVNT, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. And when I was doing the research, I found out their agency's mascot was a David Bowie-inspired animated honey badger cartoon character, complete with an English accent and a Ziggy Stardust lightning bolt across his face. And when I asked Paul about it, Paul explained that Bowie Badger, that's his name, Bowie Badger is a blend of the endless curiosity of David Bowie and the ferocious tenacity and ravenous appetite of the honey badger. That's a nice combination, right? I love it. And it absolutely makes sense once you get to know more about them and their agency. So we had a great conversation. In this episode, Kristina and Paul tell us a little bit about the new frontiers of brand storytelling and live experience innovation. We talk about their game-changing wow plus what concept and their proprietary invention methodology that's propelling brands to new heights and recent accolades. Paul underscores the value of creating empathy through authentic storytelling, and Kristina defines the narrative arc necessary for truly engaging events. And they both discuss the role of emerging tech, like we talked about VR, AR, and the metaverse, and how that's enriching these new experiences without losing the soul of storytelling. So get ready for an engaging discussion on how we can maintain authenticity, engagement, and emotional connection in the digital age with my inspiring and inspired guests, Kristina McCoobery and Paul Blurton. I read on your website, you said, we are on a mission to be the best live brand storytelling agency in the world. Now, live is taking on a whole new meaning, being able to bring people in, through their screens. I mean, what I love about you guys, you seem to always do things that are just a little different. Great example. I mean, I don't know how long Bowie Badger has been up on your screen and the graphic representation, but your website said to me, hey, these people approach things differently. Tell me more about how you're approaching things differently now with live brand storytelling.
The one thing I would clarify is that, just because something, and it is a nuance, a lot of people say, is that meaning live? that doesn't imply that it's in person, right? In person and virtual is it IRL? Even that, I don't know. This feels real to me, right? So truly physically in person and virtual can still be live. It can still be a live brand storytelling event. And I do think that the nuances of those words has been a little bit clouded. Like, is it going to be live? Well, I don't know. This feels live.
I see your distinction between IRL and, just on screen or digital. But can you get, part of storytelling is making that emotional connection. So what are you doing, Paul, to make that emotional connection with the audience? How are you telling that story?
Well, okay, so I'll hold that thought and then I'll come back to it, because first I will you brought up Bowie Badger. And so he is very important to the agency, because I think that, well, first of all, let's talk about what a brand is, because we work in this world of brand marketing and brand communication, right? And for those who don't work in this world, brands, you ask people on the street, like, what is a brand? They'll say, well, it's a logo, it's a slogan, it's colors, it's those types of things, right? And then those of us who work in the world of brands and who work with brands and who serve brands, right? We look at brands differently. We recognize that brands are nebulous, living, breathing entities, and that actually what a brand is and what a brand means is an exchange between the company and those who share it, right? Which is almost every audience that we're ever asked to engage, right? They are the ones who shape what the brand means. Right. So any audience that our clients come to us and say, hey, we need you to help us engage this audience. It's our employees, it's our customers, it's the press, it's consumers. Those people are the people who actually control what the brand means. Right. I've often said that a brand is what people say about you when you leave the room. And this is true of people's personal brands. It's certainly true of agencies, and it's true of the brands that we serve, right? Because what they think and feel about the brand is essentially what the brand is. And if we can shape or persuade or shift the way that they think and feel about their brand, well, then we are now in the business of brand marketing. Right? So that's kind of what we're doing, right? We're trying to shape that perception. And those perceptions, of course, can be incredibly deep-seated and deeply rooted in our sort of limbic systems, right? We all trust that Nike is a progressive, cultural, relevant company. We trust that Apple is for creative people. We have these deep-seated beliefs that if someone was to poke and prod us and ask us why, we wouldn't really be able to say why. But we believe it in our hearts, and we believe it as strongly as other things that we might hold true, right? So being able to shape that is kind of what we do, which then brings us to sort of our own agency and our own brand. And you mentioned that we like to sort of do things differently, or at least explore what different might look like. Which leads us to Bowie Badger, right? He's the personality of INVNT and of INVNT Group. We invented him years ago.
Paul, for people who are listening, I have an image of what Bowie Badger looks like, but just give us a little context so as you tell this story, people know who this character is or what it is.
Yes, I will. He is a cartoon animated version of a honey badger dressed as David Bowie, with a David Bowie Aladdin saying zigzag across his face. And that is because Bowie Badger is made of two parts: the insatiable thirst for creativity and reinvention of David Bowie, merged with the appetite and fearlessness of the honey badger. And we put those two qualities together years ago, and Bowie Badger was born. He became our agency mascot. And as we like to say, if you've ever been to Austin, Texas, their slogan is "Keep Austin Weird." Bowie Badger is how we keep INVNT weird. So he's our talisman. He's how we remember that our clients don't come to us because they want us to be like them. They want us to be different than them. They want us to bring something to them that they don't have. And that's the whole role of an agency, right? So that's really important, right? Which then comes back to the answer to your ultimate question, right? Which is, how do we effectively sort of express brands in different ways, right? And to me, that's when people start using these really nebulous words like spirit and soul and essence, right? And it's because we can't quite describe like what a brand is, right? But where we like to come from is we like to dig in with our clients and understand, well, like, okay, well, what is the heritage of the brand? What are your values? And most importantly, like, what do you aspire to mean to people, right? And we're not afraid of the word ambition either. Like, we like clients who have big ambitions. Many of our clients may be at one place, but they have a clearly stated ambition that they want their brand to mean something else to people. And those tend to be the clients that we are most effective with. And when they are able to express that they have an ambition that their brand means something else to a group of people than it does now, then that's when we come in and when we're most effective.
So, Kristina, it's not necessarily always your job. Hopefully they have an idea of their brand, but are you working with some companies that maybe might not pop out like a Nike or an Apple? You do a lot of work with SHRM.
Absolutely.
I don't know if they ever thought of brands and brand stories there. You must have worked side by side with them to create who they are now.
First of all, great example of a long-term partnership that has actually expanded significantly over, the past 4 years, and where we have been much more involved in their consumer facing, their commercials, their brand positioning. They have an incredible internal team there, and we've really become an extension of that. And that lends itself, like I said, to their advertising, to how they face their members on their website, to how that shows up at their annual convention. So we really run the gamut in terms of all of their touch points as a brand. And I will say, for those people that have known that brand for a long time, it looks very different in 2023 than it did in, say, 2018. They've made a huge shift, and it's noticeable, and we've thoroughly enjoyed being a part of that ride. And it was very intentional on their part. They brought us as an extension of their team with as Paul pointed out a little earlier, they're one of those brands that said, we want to move the needle here. We want to change how people see our brand. And you hear that all the time in input meetings, even if it's if it's a competitive bid and they say, we want to move from point A to point B, we want you to help us get there. The decision and creative design and strategy on that journey is usually what wins the business. So we love those opportunities, especially where they're asking us, you tell us, how long is it going to take to move the needle and change our brand? How do we do it? What's the first step? What are those sacred cows, those things that we have to keep as part of it? Those are the most exciting projects for us.
And Paul, it must be tough sometimes. As you said, you want to do things different. Anyone could come in and kind of work with a brand and tell a story. But, as I said, there's that little bit of slightly off. It's a little different. It's not the first thought you might have to come creatively. How do you deal with some of those clients that are just, I don't know, it's a little risky, or I don't get it? Are they immediately on board, or do you have to do a lot of hand-holding and trust us?
I mean, that's a great question. I'll start with this. First of all, we don't seek to be different for the sake of it, right? We're never interested in recommending either a piece of technology or some gimmick or some gag that's just going to be different because we have a phrase at INVNT, which is wow plus what, which is, you have to wow people. And in fact, in every brief you ever get from a client, they're going to use the word wow. We need to wow people, right? And we get that. We have to wow people. But wow plus what is sort of one of those cultural touchstones that we have, and then where there has to be a reason that you're recommending something. And that tracks back to how do you then ask clients to take risks, right? And so we have a system at INVNT. It's called invention. It's a proprietary kind of methodology that's very close to my heart. But what it is, it's a stacking hands with our clients so that by the time you get to the moment where you say what the risk is, it makes all the sense in the world.
I love the stacking hands concept because, hey, you guys have invested up until this far. You're with it here. So we're just going this one little thing. It's not going from 0 to 10.
Yeah, because if you recommend a hard left and you haven't done any of that discovery work with your client and any of that sort of strategic deep diving with the client to really understand what's at stake here, what do we really want? What does the audience want from us? If you don't do that work, then the hard left is just going to seem like hard left for no reason. When you get there together, then suddenly the risk makes all the sense in the world, and suddenly it's worth the reward. And we do have an internal mantra at INVNT, which is that when we're going in to present ideas to a client, if there's not something in there that makes us scared, then we haven't been creative enough. If our producers look at us and go, I don't know how we're going to pull that off, or if there isn't something in there that makes us a little bit nervous, then we don't feel like we're really doing our job. But then it's about that stacking of hands with the client and saying, hey, if we take this strategic and creative risk, here's what could happen as a result, right? And if that maps back to what their ambition is, well, then suddenly it becomes a lot easier to take that risk.
I would also say it's why it's so hard to just, take something off the shelf. because, what wows one brand is not going to wow another. So that wow factor, we don't just go to we don't just open up the Dropbox folder called wow and, pull something that we think might work. You can't back into it that way. So I think that's because we approach it in that sort of bespoke brand world. That's why I think the creative that we are presenting and pitching, we get feedback constantly, and we are consistently, I think, winning because it is creative that is so customized to their brand strategy and not just for the sake of wow.
Well, speaking of winning, I know you just won 7 Hermes Creative Awards in 2023, 7 of them, which is very, very impressive. And why don't you tell me about, maybe a couple of those events and what was so special and why you won those particular awards?
I will say that we're just as excited to celebrate our employees who worked on those projects as we are the product and the relationship to the client as well. I think, yes, it's a nice accolade. It gets us props. It gives us legitimacy, certainly in certain regions around the world. Those awards speak volumes that we've been recognized by certain establishments and organizations as doing exceptional work. What I personally love about it, and what I think is winning those awards, is the team that produces the event, that designs the creative. That for me is the best part. And I also think why we win, because the ideas are extraordinary and the execution is flawless. And so when we can praise those teams, we are the first ones to list the team that worked on it individually. We're constantly putting our individual employees up for recognition. I just saw our creative director for our Web3 division in Singapore. She was just listed as, the 40 under 40 female creatives in the region, super exciting stuff. So for me, that's why I love the awards. I do think the reason we're winning, though, is because the creativity tends to be, as you just said, a little different, sometimes a little off the beaten path.
So when we were talking about, trying to bring customers or clients with you in this sort of journey of extreme creativity, they're choosing you, first of all, probably because they see that, you probably win a certain business or have long-term relationships because they see it time and time again. But what about the internally? You say your teams, you want to give praise to your teams. Is that an interesting vetting process, getting people who are aligned with, your creative process?
I'll tell you a quote that I shared with our company a couple times in the past 3 years. We have grown at a just extraordinary rate since 2020. The agency's almost doubled in size and in revenue. And at one point, there was absolutely a burnout factor going on. And we had a company-wide call, which we actually did them bi-weekly originally. We got the entire company on the phone. We were very transparent during the pandemic. And we've continued that sort of regular company-wide communication. So a couple of years ago, when the work was absolutely bigger than the size of team we had to get it done, we addressed it on the call. And I said to everybody, look around you. We are actively hiring, actively interviewing, but look around you. It's not as easy as you think to find more of you. And it's not. So, we have a great program here. It's called Grant in the Hand, that if you send us somebody that ends up working out as an inventor and we hire them and get $1,000, I'd rather pay one of our employees $1,000 finder fee than, outside recruiters. No offense to them, because they're fabulous as well. But our people are the best at finding more of themselves, and we do have an extraordinary team of people, and it's not as easy to find them as you think. You're absolutely right. So if you're out there listening to this podcast, you can reach out to our HR team.
That's great. You can become an inventor. What an obvious connection there that I didn't make originally. But yes, a lot of people dropped out of this business. A lot of people have been in it for 20, 30 years. During the pandemic, they were part of that big group of people that decided, hey, I'm kind of done with this. And I've always been wondering, who are those new people? So you get new people who have had experience also with this new sort of digital revolution and digital perspective. You also have people who haven't, over 30 years done it the same way. So there's a lot of young people who can, come in. But let's also talk about the value that can be brought to a live audience. We're talking about digital, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about that. But how do you bring value to attendees who choose to experience this live event, in person? How do you ensure that the live aspects offer something irreplaceable? That you're going to get a great experience, online, but if you come, it's going to be even better. Paul, how would you address that?
Well, you've just touched upon, I think, why the people who work in the live side of the business largely did not go off and learn how to make wicker baskets during the pandemic. I think everyone wants to get back into the room because that's where the magic happens. And I think, well, just for me personally, when I grew up, my father worked in the National Theatre, and I remember my first exposure to what I would call the power of live was a production that he had something to do with at the National Theatre, and it was a production of Sweeney Todd. And when you walked into the theatre, they had very early smell machines. We're talking about the 1980s here, of course. But as you walked into the theatre before the show, it smelled of pies. It smelled quite delicious and made you almost hungry as a kid. And then you sit down and the curtains open, of course, and you watch the show and you realize what's in the pies. And you feel this sense of nausea and and so suddenly you realize, like, well, this is the magical thing, right, that can't be replaced and that will stay in your memory forever. And we often speak with our clients very candidly, actually, about fast forward 5 years. Most of the people who attend this event, it would be remarkable if they remembered what the theme was. They won't. What the design of the set was. They probably won't. They might even forget what city they were in, but they won't forget that magic moment or moments that happened that they then carry with them through the rest of their years, right? And when they bump into other people who were at that meeting or at that event, whether they're employees or whether they're press or whoever, they say to each other, they're like, were you at that one? Were you at the one where the car came out of the bubble? Were you at the one when the wall opened and something amazing happened? Like that's how people remember things. That's how humans remember things. We remember these remarkable moments and these remarkable experiences, right?
Yeah, where there's like a visceral emotional response. That is what we're always looking for, and Paul's absolutely right. And there are many, we put ourselves to that test, in our internal review process before we go pitch to the client. Is this goosebump worthy? Is this memorable? Is this something that you would be able to go home, retell with incredible sense of passion and an emotional memory of it?
And interestingly, we work in what you might call sort of an extension of the media world, right? Because media is obviously used in all these different ways to influence consumer thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and so on. But what we do in the live space is actually not media, right? Because media suggests that there is a medium. There is something in between the client, the message, the product, and me. It's a page in a magazine. It's a screen that I'm looking at. It's a television. Right? That's the medium that delivers the message from them to me as an audience member. But when you get an audience together live, you've removed the medium. Right? You are now in it. There is no need for a medium now. You are actually connected in a way that can't be replicated by any form of traditional media.
Yeah, it's the same thing as experiencing a stand-up special in your living room. It can be funny, but having those people all around it becomes a more immersive experience. But how do you create that immersive, visceral experience with the audience? Is it just how they're experiencing it, or is there other ways to try to find ways at these live IRL events to get them feeling viscerally connected to each other?
The design of the event isn't now always people in seats and being passive and receiving content. A lot of the events that are the brands we're working with are designing, producing, and executing where the audience member is moving through a space. They're engaging with, different forms of technology as a group or with their phone, and then they're all gathering in one place where there's a gathered together experience. And it's a mix of all of those. I think the days of sitting and being a passive audience member for hours and hours at a time isn't going to pass the test now.
Yeah, you've teed me up perfectly. I was going to say a similar thing, Kristina. I just took my kids to the Gilder Center at the American Museum of Natural History right here in New York. And they have an absolutely incredible, really well-produced interactive experience that has 360-degree projection, amazing graphics and animations, projection on the floor that the kids can all run around and interact with. And the adults you see end up acting like kids too and moving around and interacting with the sort of a 15-minute show, right? And you watch this thing and you step outside afterwards and the kids loved it and you go, well, this is what the people who come to our events are doing at the weekend. Right. So if that's what they're doing at the weekend, we better step up our game because we can't have them come from that on a Sunday to our event on a Monday and then plant them in a dark room for 6 hours and expect them to be excited, right? And so I think that taking people into those sort of almost like breaking apart the story into something that can be experienced in sort of, unique and different ways is certainly one of the trends that we're experiencing.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the print behind you. I assume it's a modern artist, but it reads to me from here sort of Van Gogh-ish. The Van Gogh experience was a big immersive experience. That's something kind of what you're talking about. You're bringing these people through this sort of brand story. Do you use the fact that sometimes they're moving around to sort of tell the story? Is there any story techniques where, okay, maybe you might start here, and the reason you're moving to the next stage or the next place because you want to find out more, so it becomes an exciting, experience?
The word immersive in a live environment can be as simple and as old school as a spotlight on a single human being. So every time that we get carried away with ourselves and start talking about how we've done the biggest LED floor ever for Samsung, and we had phones flying out of the floor and no one could tell how we did it because it was 3D, it was now a hologram, how on earth did you pull that off, kind of thing, right? And it's great because we're proud of those moments. And they read on camera and people share them, and it does all the things that Samsung wants, which is that they want people to view and share, right? So that's great. But for the art of storytelling isn't just about amazing technical whiz-bang, right? Like, you can create immersion by just telling a great story. And I'm a huge advocate for that because many of our clients don't have Samsung budgets, right? And we still have to tell an engaging story. And to immerse someone in a story isn't always about using technology. Back to your question, though, yeah, to me, it has to be based on the idea, though, right? So, we work in the pharmaceutical space. Now, in the pharmaceutical space, asking people to step into the shoes of a patient population is a very powerful thing. You need someone to believe that what they're doing is going to benefit someone other than them. Most of the time, those other people are suffering from some disease that your sales force don't themselves have. So creating their empathy, right, becomes this a key strategic imperative is to create their empathy. So that would be an example, Scott, based on your question, of why you might create an experience that moves through one suite into another suite, into another suite, into some kind of a chaptered experience, because you want people to kind of walk in the shoes somehow of those who they don't otherwise share experiences with.
Yeah. And I think not only an empathetic experience, but also in general, creating some journey path is crucial. So it can't just be a wake up in the morning and rinse and repeat of what we did the day before, or frankly, even the morning into the afternoon, right? So I think crafting a journey, which Paul and his team talk all the time about when we are designing an event, is how do you craft that journey? The journey could be an hour, the journey could be 3 days, but there better be a beginning, middle, and an end. There better be an arc. There better be an emotional journey. Otherwise, they're going to wonder why they stay for the whole thing.
It's about having emotional intelligence as you're creating this and giving them that experience. I love the idea of giving them the feeling of empathy so that they are more motivated to do their work. And there's probably some cool ways that, you have done that. Let's talk about just some technology in the IRL world. I noticed that, a new phrase is MAS, which I guess MAAS, that's multiverse as a service. And how much experience have you explored? And as we're going into, technological whiz-bang right now, we're going into things like augmented reality, virtual reality. Have you had yet clients that have wanted to bring the metaverse to a live experience? And what does that look like?
Yeah, well, I'll just say we actually have an entire Web3 division of the agency now. It is headquartered in Singapore, although it's servicing clients all around the globe. It's called INVNT Atom. And it's extraordinary how many of our clients want to hear what we're doing. We're very fortunate that we have robust projects where we're building out an entire metaverse for a certain brand that's getting launched soon. And I think it's again, another form of storytelling. We're not going to throw out the entire way we do things and not tell a story through the metaverse. it's another vehicle, as Paul talks about this a lot, that it's not necessarily going to change the way everybody experiences everything. It's another tool in the toolbox, and we are using it. To answer your question, we're using AI, we're using augmented reality, we're using the metaverse, and we're using it again when it services the strategy that's in front of us.
I think the interesting thing about the metaverse is that if you ask most people what they think of the metaverse, I would say that parents would say, well, my kids, they're on Roblox, they're on Minecraft, it's children's stuff, not for me, kind of thing. We're all aware of Mark Zuckerberg and Meta's kind of bid to own that as an idea, and it hasn't really come to fruition. So maybe people have kind of moved on, right? Then you look at industry and you look at the commercial side and you realize that every single industry that matters is actually investing in what you might call the industrial metaverse or the B2B metaverse, right? And that this is not going anywhere, and that this is going to be a tool for training global workforces or global customer interactions and so on. And so Kristina is absolutely right that we're really proud to be on the forefront of that, because with some of our clients, we are literally creating new spaces that can be used for everything from training to customer engagement to consumer engagement. And that once you have the plumbing in place, then you can build the creative on top of that and extend it to a wide variety of audiences. So it's really exciting.
You know, metaverse is still out there a little bit. I know you folks are working on it. What kind of shifts are you anticipating in audience behavior and expectations, let's say over the next 5 years, over the next decade? Where are we heading? And if we are in the metaverse, are we all together in the metaverse? Are we still showing up to meetings? I hope so. Or is it just, something to add on to these IRL experiences?
It's the latter. There will be more experiences that are not IRL. There'll be more of them, right, to choose from, but they will never, in my humble opinion, ever replace an in-person IRL where people are standing in the same space together. It'll never replace that. And all you have to do is look at the incredible, we were talking earlier about an emotional response. All you got to do is look at the unbelievable emotional response people have had as we've returned to IRL events. Everyone talks about that moment that they heard, audio in the room, like live music for the first time after the pandemic. I can't tell you how many stories I hear about people like, oh my God, I had no idea what an amazing part of my life that was until I didn't have it. So that is coming back. And if anything, there is an increased appreciation and love for it that we didn't have before. So I think the bar is getting set so high for agencies like us to deliver that experience and make sure we're meeting the very high expectations people have, that this is something treasured to them. And we need to respect that and show up and deliver something that is a treasured piece of creative for them.
I love that. I mean, to me, it's also about, there are certain things that are transactional and there are some that aren't. So going to see a live musician play in concert is not a transactional thing. It's something you deeply value. And as Kristina said, when you're there, you feel the thump of the bass and the drum in your chest, and it can't be replicated. However, you look at your children playing multiplayer games in what can only be described as the metaverse, in three-dimensional environments where they are able to interact with others who are not in the same room or even the same country or continent as they are. And then you go, well, are they going to grow up and really expect to go shopping in a completely two-dimensional environment like we do now? So in a two-dimensional e-commerce environment, which is entirely transactional, right? There are going to be multiple ways to upscale what those transactional experiences are with these kind of three-dimensional metaverse experiences, I think.
Well, what I'm hoping for is, like what we're, you're talking about live concerts and just being there, being around everyone having this sort of love relationship with the music, with the artist. Hopefully the technology be something that just sort of enhances it. Of course, what comes to mind immediately is the whole U2 residency in the Sphere. You're having this incredible experience.
But what a great example, because it is an enhancement of the experience. U2 is on the stage, but make no mistake about it. If it weren't them performing, it would not be that experience. So again, I think it is an enormous enhancement. But just like with most fascinating technology, if that's all there is, it's not going to hold you. It will not hold you for a long period of time. The soul of that performance, the story, the performer, that experience has to be part of the mix. Otherwise, people will get bored.
We clearly know that the reason why brand storytelling is so important is it is that emotional connection that we get with stories. And, whether it's a speaker or a whole event, there needs to be some sort of story so that we feel invested in it, that we feel connected to it. And I hope you guys continue to use the Austin tagline, keep it weird, but keep it inventive and unique. I'm always impressed by you. It was great to sit down and talk to you and hear more about what your plans are and where your vision is for the company and where your vision is for audience experiences as we move forward. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Cheers.
That's it for now. Thanks once again to eSpeakers, the #1 way to find your next perfect speaker. With the deepest catalog of professionals available, you can be assured that the speaker you book will be the absolute best speaker based on your goals, bar none. I've been your host, Scott Bloom, corporate event MC and comedic keynote speaker. And of course, your connoisseur of connections. Oh, by the way, and if you're interested, you can book me for your next event on eSpeakers Marketplace at espeakers.com/marketplace. And if you like what you heard, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you loved what you heard, drop us a review and don't forget to share with your friends. Thanks so much for listening. Now go out and make your event a great one.